Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to trickle in, and we're so excited to see you tonight. Hey, everyone. For those who might have just pulled in, we are going to be getting started shortly, so just hold on tight. Hi, y'all. For those who are just coming in, we are giving people some time to trickle into the event, so just hold tight for 1 or 2 more minutes, and we're excited to get started. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Reclaiming the Commentary, an event that brings together an exciting lineup of student athletes and student athlete alumni who identify as Asian or Asian American to share their perspectives in a series of short but powerful talks. My name is Sarah Hawley, and I am a senior advisor on the Asian American Center campaign team, and I'm excited to be your MC for the evening. The UNC Asian American Center, or AAC, Carolina Athletics, and the Carolina Union Office of Student Life and Leadership, or SLL, are glad and grateful that you all are joining us tonight in celebration of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or APAM. So APAM is typically observed in May, but here at UNC, we like to celebrate in April. This is the UNC Asian American Center's first APAM since opening its doors virtually last fall. And tonight's event also marks the AAC's first ever collaboration with either Carolina Athletics or SLL. We want to give a big shout out to Marcus Donnie at Carolina Athletics and Sarah Levine at SLL for being really instrumental in bringing this collaboration together. So before we get into our program and introduce our starting lineup, I'd like to welcome Dr. Heidi Kim, the AAC Director, to share a few words.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. In the true spirit of continuing the student activism and engagement that created the Asian American Center in the first place, tonight's event was curated by our amazing students with Marcus and Sarah's support. So thanks to all of them for their hard work. I want to share with you some of our other Asian Pacific American Heritage Month events. We have a robust lineup this month. So on Friday, April 23rd at noon, we will have a roundtable on the history and the current situation in terms of Black and Asian Activist Alliance. Keep an eye out for a special event on Thursday, April 29th. Can't quite announce it yet. And also an event on the model minority on May 10th. And those events are co-hosted respectively with SLL and the School of Pharmacy. On April 30th, we will have a live stream on YouTube of performances showcasing the talents of the Asian American community to round out APAM. You can sign up for our mailing list or of course find all of that information on our website, and I'm dropping that in the chat right now. I'll turn things back to Sarah. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kim. So without further ado, allow me to walk you through our game plan for the evening. Okay, so you all will hear from our speakers, Ezra Baeli-Wang, Pinwen Liu, Michelle Ecoma, Toby Song, and Kane Ma. Unfortunately, Brianna Wen could not join us tonight due to unforeseen circumstances, but she does send her regards. Be sure to stick around throughout the event because throughout the night, we'll be announcing our giveaway winners from among the UNC affiliated attendees who are currently tuned in. After that, we'd like to invite you all to interact with the student athletes and student athlete alumni through Q&A. Feel free to use Zoom's Q&A function to send in your questions as you think of them, and I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf at the end of the program. Now let's go ahead and meet our first speaker. So Ezra Baeli-Wang is a poet, essayist, and speechwriter at West Wing Writers. Ezra graduated from Carolina with degrees in Peace, War, and Defense and Chinese with a minor in creative writing in 2017. During his undergraduate years, Ezra competed on the men's fencing team, served as president of the UNC and ACC Student Athlete Advisory Committees, and led the ACC student athlete community's successful grassroots campaign to repeal North Carolina's anti-transgender law, House Bill 2. Ezra's talk will touch on what it's like to sometimes feel invisible as an Asian American. So I'd like to invite Ezra to go ahead and turn your camera on now. Hi, Ezra.
Hey, Sarah, thank you so much.
Of course, so excited to hear from you. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to the Asian American Center and Carolina Athletics and SLL for having me here tonight. 4 weeks ago, a white man walked into 3 spas in Atlanta and shot 8 people dead. 7 of them were women and 6 of them were Asian. 25 years earlier, on that same date, I was born to an Asian father and a white mother, at a time when the state constitutions in South Carolina and Alabama still included bans on interracial marriage. Alabama didn't repeal that section of its constitution until 2000. And when they did, more than 40% of people voted to keep it in place. 150 years ago, a white mob in LA, roughly 3 hours south of where I'm sitting right now, rounded up 10% of the city's entire Chinese population and lynched them. I say all this because without it, it's impossible to begin talking about what that day 4 weeks ago was like for me. The weight that I felt on my birthday when I heard what had happened in Atlanta wasn't just the weight of that tragedy, but a much heavier one, accumulated over the course of my life. I wasn't around when Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, or when Vincent Chin was beaten to death in Detroit. But I was there when a white woman in line at the state fair called my father a chink, when kids in middle school would wrinkle their noses at the same foods they now Instagram, when working at a company where I was the only non-white person, the boss looked directly at me before saying, "That'd be harder than trying to find Jackie Chan in a Chinese phone book." So, when the spokesperson for the sheriff's office said that there might not be a racial motive behind the Atlanta shooting because the shooter described the women he killed as temptations he wanted to eliminate, amid the shock and the fury and the grief, I felt the heat of a feeling that I hated for its familiarity. Shame. Shame because the way these women were being simultaneously erased and transformed, erased into mere temptations and transformed into the unwitting authors of their own deaths, didn't feel new. It was the same inexplicable shame that made me tell my dad in front of a white friend's parents that I hated the online Chinese language learning games he'd found for me, which I actually loved. It was the same shame that I wrestled and redirected into sneering condescension when he mispronounced words or didn't understand a joke. It's an insidious kind of shame that gets us to do its work, that makes us begin to appreciate, even crave, the perverse safety of erasure. In a New York Times interview in February, actor Steven Yeun says, "Sometimes I wonder if the Asian American experience is what it's like when you're thinking about everyone else, but nobody else is thinking about you." In her book, Minor Feelings, Kathy Park Hong writes, "When I hear the phrase Asians are next in line to be white, I replace the word white with disappear." There's a shared element of invisibility in these reflections that resonates. But I wonder if for many of us, it's more like being erased and transformed so endlessly that you never have time to simply be. And so instead, we do. And as athletes, I think that's especially true. Our identities intersect at the nexus of production and performance. Racially, we're expected to live up to the myth of the model minority, to be straight-A students, to deliver minimal disruption and optimal achievement. On the field or the court, we face similar pressures. We're rarely looked to as leaders. We're the hard workers, the team players, those who earned our spot, more so than others by way of practice and dedication, rather than natural talent or athleticism. See, the thing about doing is that it implies a certain fundamental level of being that allows us to only glancingly assert our existence by pointing at our achievements instead of ourselves. It allows us to never have to slow down and embrace or inhabit the space we take up in just being. It's as if because our parents or their parents before them fought so hard to earn their place in this country, the idea that a space for us must be earned has become so entrenched that it's simply assumed. Sometimes we even advocated ourselves. Former presidential candidate Andrew Yang wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post in response to increasing anti-Asian violence, where he calls on Asian Americans to, quote, "embrace and show our Americanness in ways we never have before, to step up, help our neighbors, wear red, white, and blue, and do everything in our power to accelerate the end of this crisis." More doing, more transforming, more responsibility for the violence we suffer, more erasure. It's not said, but it's implied that embracing our Asianness in this moment would be somehow un-American. There's this famous photograph Dorothea Lange took of a Japanese grocery store in California during World War II. The store is dark and there's no one inside. An enormous sign hangs over the entrance, and in huge all capital letters it reads, "I am an American." Above that sign hangs another. That one says, "Sold." The store's owner, along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans, was forced to give up his business, his home, and his community to live out the rest of the war in a desert camp surrounded by chain link fence and razor wire. I came across the photo for the first time 4 weeks ago, on my birthday after the shooting, when my reaction had, of course, been to do something, to reach out to every AAPI group I could find and offer to help write statements, to call friends and family members, create social media posts for white allies wondering how to support their Asian classmates and coworkers. I lost myself in the doing because it was too painful to be. But here's the thing I learned. If you are intentional about bringing your whole self, your insecurities and your doubts, your aspirations and your fears, your pain and your shame, to whatever it is you're doing in the classroom, in your sport, in your job or relationships, you can find yourself in the doing too. It can help you rediscover how to be. That's what writing this speech did for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezra. That was a really powerful talk, and I appreciate you, starting a dialogue around the violence that Asians in the U.S. are facing and have been facing. I think it's safe to say that it hits home heavy for a lot of us. So thank you again. So next, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to Pinwen Liu. A member of the class of 2023, Pinwen is a full-time student athlete studying information science and playing on the women's golf team. Pinwen will share her experience with navigating contact zones. So with that, I would like to invite Pinwen to turn your camera on now. All righty, hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'll allow you the floor.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Pinwen, and I'm a third-year student athlete from Taiwan. I came to the States when I was 15 years old, and just as many other international students have experienced, I struggled to fit in. There was a long period of time where I was confused about my identity and thought less of my culture due to its difference. Not long ago, I came across an article written by Mary Louise Pratt about the art of contact zones. She explained contact zones as a term referring to social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, and often in the context of highly asymmetrical relations of power. As she explored the interactions of people with cultural differences, her observations led to the conclusion that there is an imbalance between power dynamics in certain cultures, mainly being the majority norms overlapping minority values. She noticed that, in particular, contact zones in American societies has suffered under this problem, with white cis narratives forcefully becoming the dominant voice. It led to the phenomenon of uniforming social environments. And for example, in middle school and high schools, teachers and students often focus on the popular perspective and leaving minimal space for minorities to share their thoughts. The systems promotes and emphasize white Western views, and in turn, silencing the perspectives of differing values, whether intentionally or not. The balance of cultural power within contact zones are especially harmful to young Asian immigrants and Asian international students who are trying to navigate the social environment. Having an external narrative that encourages superiority of one culture in particular is very dangerous because it leads to the potential feeling of shame when being associated with the more undesirable or weaker culture. And in turn, one may want to abandon their certain culture identities in order to fit in. Speaking from experience, it is very confusing when one enters the contact zone of Eastern and Western culture. As a freshman international student surrounded with Western peers, I once made the mistake of trying to turn down my Asianness in hope to fit in. Because unlike high school, where everybody was forced to become friends simply by being in the same space, you have to more actively seek out friendships in college. So instead of creating mutual cultural understandings with other American kids, I believe that I had a higher chance to make friends if I insert myself as a member of their society. There was a fierce battle within me where the identities I formed in the States and back home collided. When I realized that not many around me were truly interested in learning about my cultural differences, or even worse, at times made racist jokes towards other Asians in front of me, I allowed myself to push away my own culture as I felt the need to do so in order to maintain friendships and to stand my ground in the social scene. The situation worsened as one of my Asian teammates began creating issues in the team due to her less proficient understanding of the English language and the American culture. There were many misunderstandings, and people were puzzled by her actions. I often have to become the translator and explain the language barrier and the cultural differences to coaches and teammates, therefore, often getting caught in between conflicts. At that time, I wrongly associated these Asian traits and values to being disliked and causing trouble, which made me want to ignore the cultural identities I shared with her even more. When I tried to change her to become more American, her confusion of me belittling my own culture became a wake up call that helped me realize how problematic my mentality was. Now, I finally understood how no culture should be deemed lesser compared to others, and it is not the responsibility of the one standing in the weaker position to fight, but also the duty of those with power to create a welcoming space for diversity and to balance cultural power dynamics by celebrating the unique identities that differ from their own. When I successfully ignored my roots, I was accepted by my Western peers. But in the process of that, I was chipping away my own identity piece by piece. I was able to finally accept myself when I balanced the power dynamics in my inner contact zone by feeling pride in my own culture. This is important for minorities in the fight against racism and oppression because the first step to being respected is to respect yourself. I think teammates and friends can best help by showing support for your Asian peers when they're honoring their own cultures. I urge everyone to put in an effort to understand the difference between people and to help create an environment where everyone can express themselves freely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pinwen. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, you know, and your Carolina experience as an international student. And I love the fact that your talk wasn't just thoughtful, it was also very personal. So really appreciate you. And with that, I hope you all have enjoyed our first couple of speakers. We're going to go ahead and transition into our first giveaway. We'd like to first thank our sponsors, Acura South Point, the UNC Athletics Department, Alumni Hall, Ben & Jerry's, Chapel Hill, Lyman Basil, and Carolina Dining Services for providing all of these amazing prizes. The first prize we're giving away is this Carolina Blue Cap, courtesy of Acura. So, virtual drum roll. The winner of this giveaway is Jennifer Williams. So Jennifer, you'll receive more information through email on how to pick up your prize. And with that, on to our next speaker. All right. Michelle Ecoma is a fourth-year medical student at the UNC School of Medicine, currently earning a Master of Public Health degree from the Gilling School of Global Public Health. She earned her undergraduate degree from UNC in 2014, where she majored in business administration and exercise and sports science with a minor in mathematics. While at Carolina, she competed for the varsity gymnastics team, serving as a team captain, and the Student Athlete Advisory Council co-president in her senior year. Michelle will talk about how the model minority myth affected her experience as a student athlete, choosing courage over comfort, and her push to expand mental health professional diversity at UNC Counseling and Psychological Services, or CAPS. Michelle, I invite you to go ahead and turn your camera on now.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. The full title of my talk is Breaking the Mold, Setting Myself Free from the Model Minority Myth. Work hard, be successful, don't cause trouble. These three ideas form the tenets of the model minority myth. And for more than 20 years of my life, they were also the three tenets that governed virtually every choice and decision that I made. Until recently, I didn't question these directives. And in fact, I, more than anyone else in my life, reinforced these ideas about how I needed to, or thought that I needed to, live my life. At a very early age, I learned that I was smart. I brought home the score report from my Iowa test of basic skills, and to this day, I remember how ecstatic my parents were that I had scored in the 99th percentile. Like any kindergartner, and let's be honest, any human being, I loved being praised. And I quickly learned that demonstrating my academic aptitude was a surefire way to garner praise from the most important people in my life. I also learned that following the rules and being a good kid earned me an equal number of gold stars from my parents and teachers. Throughout my K through 12 education, these patterns were reinforced. I brought home good grades and glowing comments on my report cards, and my parents and teachers applauded me. I then became even more motivated and worked even harder to perform well in the classroom. Over time, I also began to evaluate my own success or failure, even my own self-worth, based on these same metrics of success. Making an A brought me very real intrinsic satisfaction, as did complimentary remarks from my teachers. I also grew up doing gymnastics, a sport that similarly measured success by how close you could come to perfection on a 10-point scale. I learned that earning a 9.0 or higher was good and worthy of praise, while anything lower would prompt disappointment from my coaches and teammates, but most of all, from myself. In coming to Carolina, the story was much the same. I worked hard in the classroom and in the gym, and good grades and high scores in my debut college season followed. Though injuries limited my athletic success during my remaining time as a Carolina student athlete, I redoubled my efforts in the classroom and community. I told myself that what I wasn't able to achieve athletically, I could make up for by maintaining a pristine academic and leadership record. And by all objective accounts, I succeeded. My senior year, I earned multiple postgraduate scholarships, was honored as a 2014 Arthur Ashe Sports Scholar of the Year and Carolina Leader of Distinction, and I received multiple Chancellor's Awards. And for a moment, these achievements felt great. However, this feeling was transient. It was soon replaced by fear and pressure, a fear that I wasn't actually worthy of these awards, that I had somehow fooled people into giving me, and pressure to prove that I was, or at least could be, the person that these accolades suggested that I had become. A few months later, I moved to Charlotte to begin my first real job as a data analyst at a digital marketing and sales company. I will spare you the details, but the transition was rough, to say the least. I cried so many times that I was convinced that my eyes would actually run out of tears. Med school has since taught me that this is impossible, but I am quite certain that I cried myself to the point of dehydration on multiple occasions. Yet this was probably one of the best decisions that I've made in my life. Although moving away from Carolina and the trusted support systems that I had here was difficult, it turned out that I needed the separation from the structure of academia and the people who cared so deeply about me. For the first time in my life, I was living in a world without syllabi and detailed workouts that outlined both the recipe and step-by-step instructions for success. I also found myself in a place where nobody knew me or had any notions about what I should or should not do. This gave me the time and the space to think about what brought me joy, what fueled my internal fire, and on the other end of the spectrum, what I never wanted to touch again, even with a 10-foot pole. It was here in Charlotte that I finally asked myself the question, what do you want for you when you take everyone else out of the equation? This question was surprisingly difficult to answer, but I ultimately landed on this: to be passionate about the activities that I choose to engage in every area of my life, to prioritize people and my relationships above all else, and to choose courage over comfort, to raise my voice and cause trouble when it is the right thing to do. Ultimately, I made the decision to leave the corporate world to pursue a career as a physician. Yes, I appreciate the irony in this, given how many times I was told that I should be a doctor growing up. But in returning to Carolina from medical school, I knew that I was doing this for myself and myself alone. To the outside observer, it may appear that not much has changed. I'm still that smart kid who's now in medical school and will soon be a doctor. However, for me, medical school could not feel more different than my life as an undergrad. I've chosen to engage in activities that matter to me, rather than working towards the most prestigious award that I can add to my resume. I've also placed friendships, mentorship relationships, and building trust with my patients at the center of my medical school experience. Given the choice between acing an exam and offering a safe space for a friend or a patient to cry, I will always choose the latter. Likewise, I am no longer afraid to rock the boat and speak up when my voice can help precipitate change. Most recently, this has meant leading advocacy efforts to expand the diversity of our mental health providers at CAPS, alongside 6 of my amazing classmates. It has also meant sharing openly and transparently about the struggles that I've faced in my life. Because changing the story of those who come behind me means having the courage to share my own. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I remembered mentioning during practice for this that I really appreciated your vulnerability and your candor, and I stand by that. I think it's really admirable and inspiring to hear from somebody who, isn't afraid to share those tough moments and how you overcame them. So next in our starting lineup, I will pull up his card. All right, Toby Song. Toby grew up in China and moved to the US at age 13. He attended UNC on a golf scholarship and graduated in 2019 with a degree in economics. He's proud to have played on the UNC men's golf team for all 4 years of his undergraduate career, and he really enjoyed using his voice as a student athlete to contribute to the local community. Toby's going to talk about witnessing and experiencing cultural differences, as well as how playing golf at UNC broadened his horizons. So, Toby, you can go ahead and turn your camera on now. Alrighty, and I'll give you the floor.
Perfect, thank you. Hi everyone, so my name is Toby. I graduated from UNC in 2019. I was on the golf team there and I studied economics at UNC as well. So first off, I wanted to thank everybody for being here, and also wanted to thank the host organizations for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts today with you. So a little background on me: I was born in Shenzhen, China, and I was raised there until I was 13 years old. And while I was in China, I was practicing golf and playing golf in China, and was fortunate enough to qualify for some tournaments over here in the States. So at age 13, me and my whole family, we moved to San Diego, where I attended high school. Upon graduating from UNC, I moved to Michigan to work at a financial firm in Michigan, and eventually I moved back to California at the end of last year. So having lived in both countries for extended periods, I've gained a true appreciation for the cultural differences between the two. Moving to the States in 13, it was definitely a difficult transition. Historically, golf has been a predominantly white sport. And when we first joined the country club here, I'm pretty sure that we were the only Chinese family at the club. Throughout the years, we've definitely had our fair share of weird looks and comments that were made towards us. But looking back at the past 11 years, I'm really proud of the way that my family and I have handled this transition and how that we've put in the effort to fit in to these foreign nations. So today I wanted to share just some of my thoughts on my experience about moving here, transitioning to a new country, and also just about everything that's going on regarding the Asian American community and what I think that we should do to move forward. So first off, I just want to quickly touch on social media. Social media, I think has been instrumental in taking part in the growth of the globalization over the past decade. However, I believe that it can also be blamed for creating some racial tension within our nation. At the press of a button, anybody can just express their toxic and hateful comments all over the world. And with the ease of access, very young kids growing up are exposed to more hate than ever before. With headlines and 10-second videos, people's attention spans getting shorter and shorter, and people are slowly losing their ability to focus on one thing. Instead, we love to read an overview or watch a 1-minute summary of the topic. This shallowness of understanding also applies to people's cultures. So, when we're born, everyone's born knowing nothing. You first learn about life with your parents, and then you go to school, you learn about language, math, science, history, and somewhere in between all that, you get exposed to other cultures, ethnicities. You make friends that are outside your circle. So with social media reaching kids younger and younger, a lot of kids are their first exposure to other ethnicities and cultures is through social media headlines. Without any personal establishment, personal connections to that group, it's very easy for them to see a stereotypical comment online and slap that assumption onto that group of people. This is very dangerous because when you don't personally know someone or something, it's way easier for you to believe what others may say about them, slap an assumption on them or even hate. I think judgment goes, it's a two-way street. Often judgment comes after you find out something about someone. However, I believe that judgment actually comes not because you know something, but because you truly don't know that person at all. In a country as diverse as the United States, racial tension is, I believe, is unavoidable, to a degree. Obviously, we're trying to work to ease that tension as much as we can, but to say that it's not going to exist at all, I think it's, a little unrealistic. But racism by itself, I think, exists all over the world. And most of the time, racism exists due to the lack of understanding and the personal experience with that certain ethnic group. For example, back in China, a lot of people in my parents' or my grandparents' generation, they've lived their entire life without meeting, anybody who's not Chinese, just because China was so excluded from the rest of the world during that time period. And it's just very easy for them to have a negative feeling or even fear towards other ethnic groups, just because they have no knowledge of them and they have no experience meeting them. So, however, in the US, because it's so diverse, racial tension can often lead to harmful actions. And especially with the ease of obtaining a firearm, but that's another topic that I'm not going to go into today. 4 weeks ago, I woke up that morning, same with many others, with a saddened heart looking at the headlines. However, the weeks following left me feeling a bit baffled because seeing all the social media posts and the protest signs with the big letters across that says "Stop Asian Hate." And immediately I strongly dislike the terminology. I think putting Asian and hate together, we're creating that connection in people's head. And I completely agree with the fact that we need to spread awareness. And I just think that we need to not just spread awareness at a surface level, it needs to be deeper. And hate is going to be there. It's not realistic for us to hope that we're going to live one day in a world without hate. But telling people to stop hating has never really led them to stop hating. So the only way to combat hate is with love. And love does not come without a personal connection. So in order to spread love, we need to spread our culture. We need to reach out to more people in our community. We need to use whatever platform we have to truly educate people on your amazing culture. For us, it's our Asian culture. I say, embrace your inner Asianness. And when I first moved to the States, I was a bit embarrassed. And some of the things that my family and I did, which is very different than other people here. And there's no right or wrong. It's just because that's how we were raised and our cultures were different. So we definitely were different and we didn't fit in. This led me to not making new friends. I was only hanging out with Asian kids, and I was being more reserved. And of course, I'd not known English, learning a new language, that played a role as well. I was that weird Asian kid eating dumplings in the hallway where everybody else is eating hamburgers and sandwiches in the cafeteria in 8th grade, right? However, as I spent more time meeting new people, I realized that our cultural differences is actually a beautiful and fascinating thing. I get to learn about their culture, they get to learn about mine, and the more unfamiliar they are with you, the more assumptions and judgment they will make towards you and your family. Instead of sitting in the corner eating dumplings, I would offer to share them with others. And once they try one, they're gonna offer their sandwich to me for the rest of my dumplings, right? They say, "Dan, you guys eat well." I say, "Yeah, this is not Panda Express." So if they never try, they never know. Throughout the last 10 years, me and my family have made a lot of friends here in the States, either through golf or through business ventures or through school. And throughout my golf career, I've also had a lot of American coaches. And a couple of them actually joined here today to listen in. And if you ask them, I promise you that every single one of them has a new appreciation for Asian culture after they've met us. And I guarantee you that they see Asians in general in a different way. Now I'm no longer embarrassed about my differences. Instead, I proudly embrace my culture and who I am. I will continue to use my platform to connect with as many people as possible so I can establish that personal connection and spread my culture. And I hope you will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, for sharing your ideas, a lot of which I hadn't even considered. I appreciate hearing how you've used your platform as a student athlete to contribute and enrich the communities around you. And it's time to announce the winners of another giveaway. So we're excited to give away 2 $10 gift cards to Lime and Basil. The winners are, virtual drum roll, Selena Shi and Luis Castro. So Selena and Luis, the 2 of y'all will receive more information through email on how to pick up your prize. With that, I am very excited to share our final speaker. Our 5th and final speaker is Kane Ma. From Greensboro, North Carolina, Kane graduated from UNC in 2018 with degrees in computer science and economics. He played on the junior varsity men's basketball team before walking on to the varsity team during his senior year, as the first Asian American player to do so since 2010. Kane is going to discuss the connection between being a student athlete and an entrepreneur, as well as how he developed unwavering belief in himself as a student athlete. So. All right, Kane, I invite you to turn your camera on now. Perfect. And I'll let you have the floor.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, really glad to be here with all you guys. And thanks to all the other panelists for such powerful conversations. So I really appreciate all of you guys. So to start off what I'm talking about, if this was, I guess, a in-person event, I would ask the question, how many of you guys have heard of the 10,000 hour rule? And I would say show of hands, but it's not gonna happen. But the 10,000 hour rule is, they say it takes 10,000 hours of dedication for someone to become an expert at a skill. For me, the skill I wanted to master was the game of basketball. And as many of y'all may know, there is a pretty big underrepresentation of Asian Americans in the sport. A stat I found was that in 2018, only 0.5% of all Division I college basketball players were of Asian or Pacific Islander descent. So for me, growing up in a Chinese household as well, you're not exactly pushed to become a star athlete. And also, especially growing up in North Carolina, I was often the only Asian people or Asian player a lot of people knew, especially as I got to play at higher levels. So today I really just wanted to share a little bit about my journey as an Asian American player growing up in NC, and how these type of experiences have really set the foundation for me now in my new journey, now as an entrepreneur. And so I think there are three concepts that were really fundamental to my experience, and that was having passion, having belief of yourself, and then awareness of yourself and others. And to get right into it, the first thing being passion is just having love for what you do and having a real why for what you do. I love playing the game, and I wanted to be the best basketball player I possibly could be. And, like I said, growing up, being, really the only Asian player a lot of people knew, outside of Jeremy Lin or Yao Ming, I got a lot of those comparisons, even though Yao Ming is 7'6", but, many people that I interacted with on the court had never been really around an Asian for a prolonged period of time. And so me growing up, there was a good amount of pressure that I felt, just feeling like in a lot of ways I was representing the entire Asian race because of that. But since I was doing something that I loved, the connection that I built with others with the same passion transcended, my parents and, our upbringings and backgrounds. So, off the court, being able to share our stories and our differences, similar to what Toby said, as I got to learn their background, they got to learn about mine. And so as a result of that, our worldviews are expanding. So when I think about the current, divisive nature of our nation, especially with the mistreatment or misrepresentation of the AAPI community, I think it's fundamentally just a lack of understanding of what it truly means to be human and to connect with others. And, now in my business career, the experience that I've had and the people that I met, I can take that with me for the rest of my life. So the second thing is belief of yourself. People will always try to put you in a box, and, so you really have to believe yourself, your why, and your purpose, more than anybody else on earth. So as a basketball player, I always believed that I could play and compete against the best, and at the very least, hold my own. And, many others maybe didn't even see it that way. So, the belief that I had to have and my vision had to just break through all of that noise and doubt. So a lot of times I would get, I guess you would call them pseudo compliments, where people would say, you're a pretty good player, but, for an Asian, or the reason you can shoot so well is because you can calculate the arc of every shot. So it's like I'm a math genius or something. And then there's obviously more, heinous comments, especially in the heat of games where, people told me to go back to China, or, shouldn't you be doing math, or, he can't even see when he's on the court. So, growing up, I always felt like a little bit like the odd one out. But, when I grew older, I did feel proud knowing that I was representing my people in a way that wasn't often done. And so when it comes to business now, everybody knows how high failure rates are for new business. And so it's the same concept, people are going to doubt you. People are not going to believe you have what it takes. And so, the title of my talk was "Smooth Seas Never Made a Skillful Sailor." And I think that quote really speaks volumes about continuing to push through barriers, and that you really want to be very in tune with what you want when you're going in through uncharted waters. And the last thing is awareness. So this is really awareness of yourself and others, and it's knowing where you really truly are at in an unbiased way. So being able to look at yourself in the mirror and being real with yourself, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, your good habits, your bad habits. And when you can do that with yourself with an open mind, it's a lot easier to be able to do the same by looking at other perspectives and other people's perspectives. So for me, you know, I play the point guard position in basketball, which is an extension of the coach on the floor. So, you know, I'm calling plays, I'm setting up the offense and defense for our team. And my goal is to put my teammates in positions where their skill set is used effectively and that they feel motivated to continue contributing at a high level. And so, you know, in the business world and when I'm just working with others in general, I often want to give people three things, and that's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Mastery being aligning the team's goals with their individual goals so that they can continue to develop that for the ultimate good of the team. Autonomy, you know, giving people freedom, your teammates freedom, and trust in them so that they can deliver at a high level. And the last thing being purpose is having a sense of ownership within the bigger picture of whatever your goal is, so that what they're doing is seen as very valuable. And so, but that always starts with just understanding perspectives and understanding who you are and where you stand. And I think that's extremely important, you know, as we continue to interact and talk with others who don't necessarily know what it means or what it's like to be Asian or Asian American. And so, you know, in conclusion, those three things, you know, passion for what you want to achieve, belief in yourself, and awareness for yourself and others. You know, those three things have really allowed me to have very positive experiences with others from many different backgrounds. And, you know, beyond this panel, you know, with us all being members of the AAPI community, I just wanted to encourage everybody to kind of think about these things as we, you know, continue to push for awareness and to break down a lot of these barriers that of, you know, misconception, misunderstanding that have been placed over us over these years. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I definitely hope to get to know some of you guys after this.
Thank you, Kane, for sharing your story. I loved hearing about how the lessons that you've learned from basketball have helped you in life. And thank you again to all the speakers for your amazing talks. Now, before a brief Q&A, it's time for our final giveaway. These are our biggest prizes of the night. First, we'll be announcing the winner of a basketball signed by our new men's basketball coach, Hubert Davis. Virtual drum roll, please. Okay. The winner of this giveaway is Monica Ravel. Congrats, Monica. And the second prize is a football signed by Coach McBride. And let's see who the winner is. Virtual drum roll. Annie Zhang. So Monica and Annie, the two of y'all will receive more information through email on how to pick up your prize. Thank you again for partaking in this exciting giveaway. We have a bunch of other prizes such as Jordan polos, a travel mug, and Carolina Dining Services swag that will be given away after the event. So look out for an email afterward to see if you won any of our other prizes. Alrighty, now it's time to turn it over to you all and with a Q&A. And so I invite all of the speakers to please turn their cameras on now. Alrighty. Perfect. And while we're here, let's go ahead and grab a quick photo. My AAC teammates are going to message me once they've taken the photo, so just hold tight for a second. All right, everybody smile. All right, let's hope no message yet. Sorry, y'all. Let's try that again. All right, smile. Waiting on the chat. Okay, we're good. We're good. Great. Yeah. So now I'm going to take a look at the questions that we've received. And yeah, like I said, feel free to use either the chat function or the Zoom Q&A. But I'll go ahead and get us started then. Did you have any Asian American role models growing up? And do you have any role models now? Any of the panelists, feel free to chime in on this one.
I can, off the top of my head, say that I think I didn't have so many Asian American role models growing up, and I certainly didn't have mixed Asian role models growing up. It was really challenging for me to kind of navigate and figure out how to navigate different realms, academic, professional, athletic, not having seen people who look like me or have my cultural experiences or my ethnic background beforehand, or in any of those spaces. Occupying that space for the first time and as an individual felt pretty isolating and overwhelming. And the fact that that also carried over into media and for a long time, and still, I think, like, Asians and Asian Americans are highly underrepresented in the stories that we tell, and the stories that we choose to platform, and how they are represented is often quite limited in scope. You know, I had the Jet Lis and the Bruce Lees and the Jackie Chans, but I didn't have examples of Asian men playing romantic leads, or Asian men being anything other than martial artists or mathematicians. And so I think, like, diversity in media representation, as well as inclusion in a variety of different spaces, matters enormously for people growing up in places where they don't really get to see people who look like themselves.
Definitely. And before I move on, if anybody has something to add, feel free to do so in the next few seconds.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that, Ezra. I feel that a lot as well. Like I said, Yao Ming is 7'6", so, like, while he was, you know, Chinese, that's about where the comparisons end. And then obviously Jeremy Lin kind of took the world by storm when he, you know, actually was given a true opportunity. And then, you know, it's actually crazy. Like, the first time he had a bad game, the New York Times, whatever huge media, the headline said, you know, he has a chink in his armor. So it's just, I thought that was kind of wild.
Wow. Sorry, I'm just, like, trying to process everything that y'all have shared just now. But let's go ahead and move on to the next question. From an attendee, what part of your culture was easiest to share with others? And I imagine that this is directed toward Toby, but if anybody, including Toby, has things to share about this question, feel free to do so.
I'll go ahead on this one. I think, I mean, obviously there's many aspects of culture that are differences, but I think for me, honestly, the most direct and the first thing usually being shared is food, because it's you know, food is a big part of our culture, and every single festival, every single holiday that we have we have a certain type of food that we eat that's part of it, and there's a story behind that, and then there's a reason behind why we eat it. You know, it relates to family, it relates to, you know, people overseas that, you know, want to come together. So I think it's a really, really good gateway for me to, invite someone to go eat Asian food with me, right? Show them authentic Asian food. And then with that, we can go ahead, that leads into a lot of stories about history, about our culture, about holidays and festivals. So I think definitely the easiest thing and the first thing for me always is usually food.
Thank you for that, Toby. Another question that we have is, how can we be better allies to the AAPI community? It's a big question.
I think allyship is always challenging, regardless of which community you're hoping to be an ally of. Obviously, no communities are monolithic. And so I think one of the best things that you can do as an ally is learn to identify opportunities to listen and opportunities to amplify the voices of the community that you want to be an ally to. But ultimately, I think it's something that, I personally struggle with. How do we be, as Asian Americans, how do we be allies to the Black community? How do we be allies to the LGBTQ community? I think there's just a lot of complex intersection between the ways different communities of color or communities that hold marginalized identities interact with, contribute to the oppression of, or stand in solidarity with other communities that are marginalized. We all hold so many identities at once, and in certain ways we're privileged and in certain ways we're marginalized. And I think that, sort of at its core, allyship is about leveraging the ways in which we have privilege that the other marginalized community might not, in order to help support that community, to amplify their voices, to stand behind them or in front of them or between police and them. But I think it's a really challenging question to answer without kind of just drifting into the vagaries of educate yourself, read up on these things, talk to the individuals in your life who hold the identities.
I think Ezra covered a lot of the things that came to mind. But a couple other things that I feel like I'm still really learning in terms of how to be an ally myself and what that really means. I think one is just having an openness to feedback and an openness to learning, because allyship is hard and it requires being uncomfortable and failing at it initially until you can get it right. And I think just being really open to knowing that it's not going to necessarily go well the first time, the second time, the third time, but that it's a process of learning. And I say that coming from a place of really struggling with that myself. But I do think that that is a place where each of us can kind of work to become a better ally. And I will just say that I've had the opportunity to work with two white allies in the work that we've been doing, and it's been immensely helpful, and we could not have done the work that we're doing without them. And so first I want to give a shout out to both of them because they've been invaluable support. But I think tangible things in terms of, if you are trying to advocate for change and write a petition or an email, ask your friends, like, can I help with that? Is there something that I can do to support you that's actually helping to draft? Because those things actually take a lot of time and energy, and especially when you're amidst kind of your own grief, it can be really helpful to have someone take some of those things on.
Thank you to both Ezra and Michelle for your responses. I'll give everybody else a moment to kind of let that sink in and maybe respond if they would like.
I have a simple point to pitch in. I think Ezra and Michelle both covered great points. And I think just as a very simple, like, day-to-day interactions with Asian peers or Asian American peers is just to stay curious of their culture and never assume that they're okay with something that you said. I think it's always important, no matter how close your relationship is with that person. Oh, it's always important to ask if something you said or something someone else said was okay, and support them that way.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Elaine Yang, a UNC alumni in Colorado. Elaine has two young daughters who are 9 and 11 years old, and they are learning about racism in their country. And as they grow into their middle school years, what words of encouragement regarding bias and anti-racism could you share?
These are hard questions, which is wonderful. I don't think I have any wonderful insight because I don't think it's an easy answer. I think one thing that might be helpful is just to keep that conversation open and to know that, you know, at that age, that it is okay to come home and speak up about, you know, small things that, you know, didn't quite land right, whether that was someone saying, oh, where are you from? Or, you know, what are you? You know, questions that I got regularly growing up and you didn't quite know how to deal with and didn't really know, couldn't label as a microaggression or racism at the time, but creating that safe space and to kind of let them find their voice at a young age to sort of make sure that those things are not things they have to kind of continue to manage and they can stand up against that.
Thanks, Michelle. I think this question is also directed toward you, so not to put you on the spot here, but appreciate all the audience interaction and questions. Could you tell us a bit more about the mental health support petition?
Yeah, I can at least give you a kind of a brief story behind it. I think in the aftermath of the tragedy in Atlanta, there were a few students who, actually probably more than a few, but a few that kind of found each other and said, you know, we feel really alone and we, you know, want to have a sense of community. We want to have a place where we can kind of collectively grieve. And we kind of found it with each other, but along the way, we found out that CAPS didn't have a provider who identified as Asian American or Pacific Islander, and how that felt like something that could be so useful in this time that was so hard for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And so I think, speaking from my own experience, I just felt a lot of anger and grief and frustration after what happened in Atlanta. And I wanted to have a way to channel that into something good that could come out of this, something positive. And this became something that it felt small, but really meaningful that we could do for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community at Carolina, is to really advocate for change so that, you know, not just in the aftermath of a tragedy, but in navigating life as a college student, which is hard. Our Asian American and Pacific Islander community here at Carolina feels like they have all of the resources and support that they need to really truly thrive and to get the most out of their education.
Thank you, Michelle. So what kind of challenges did you all face within the AAPI community, like your family or your peers, as collegiate athletes at a NCAA Division I school? And the person who asked this question also added, for kind of context, that in a lot of AAPI cultures, parents tend to want their kids to focus on their studies. So they're wondering if those kind of barriers existed for all of you.
I can speak on this a little bit. For me, I don't think those contradicts each other. At least for me and my family, golf was always was something that I focused on pretty much my entire life. Going through college, leading up to college now, but it didn't mean that school wasn't important. It is always stressed to me entire life going into school that school was one, golf was second. Even though golf was something that I worked on every single day. It was a career that I wanted to pursue. So for me, because of the community I was in, and I completely agree with the individual that asked this question, the Asian culture, parents definitely tend to want their kids to focus on studies. And I think, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's 100% correct, right? Studies is very important. So it doesn't really contradict each other. Study is always first for me, whatever other activities, you're very, very passionate about, that will come after you make sure that your studies are good.
Yeah, for me, for me, it was similar, my parents definitely stressed to have a really good education, and I respect my parents greatly. So like Toby said, I wanted to make sure I was doing so, and as I continue to do so, they would continue to trust me and my decisions outside of in like whatever else I wanted to do. And once they saw how much I loved the game of basketball, they trusted that my decisions with it. And actually, like my senior year of high school, I transferred schools to play at another school for basketball purposes, and that was actually a really, really big hurdle in my life, since they they just didn't quite understand it at first, like just doing something like that. But I think it's just I was able to just talk with them, and they trusted me. So
I can quickly I think, echo a lot of what's been said, and that for me, I don't know that they were necessarily at odds with one another, but in a sense, my parents made it very clear that academics came first, and that once if I kept my grades up and if I did well in the classroom, I could continue to participate in this sport that I loved. And so in some ways, maybe it was an incentive. So to perform well in the classroom was an incentive to get to continue to do something that I loved, which was gymnastics. And I think, I chose Carolina in part because it had just a tremendous academic program in addition to a tremendous athletic program. And so in a way, the two have always felt intertwined for me. And I know that's kind of specific to different sports, but I think in the gymnastics community, it's not uncommon to sort of find that, you have a group that naturally sort of takes the discipline that they have in their sport and applies it to academics as well.
Thank you all for your responses to that question. Another attendee asks, I would love to know how you all respond to the "no, but where are you from" question that we are all too familiar with. And I guess, kind of adding on myself, like, maybe what advice or tips do you have for navigating that?
I don't really need them to ask me that question. I tell them I'm from China right off the bat. I'm proud about that. And I don't think there's, when they ask me where I'm from, I'll tell them I'm living in San Diego at the moment, but I grew up in China. And I love that. So, so honestly, I don't really see, why there is a need to shy away from that question. I guess it's my point.
Yeah, I think Toby's perspective is interesting as an international sort of from an international perspective, coming from China, being able to tell people who might be asking because they think you don't look white or think that you specifically look East Asian or Chinese. Well, yeah, you're right. I am from China. I think being Asian American and also being someone who's like mixed race, and so I'm a bit racially ambiguous, and I think People have asked me before if I'm Native American or if I'm Hispanic. And so when I get the question, no, where are you really from, after telling people, well, I'm from Hillsborough, New Jersey, it's helpful for me to clarify, well, are you asking, like, what is my ethnic background? Like, are you asking racially what my composition is? And I think that serves two purposes. One, it fundamentally clarifies what they're actually asking, because the truth is I am from Hillsborough, New Jersey. It's where I was born, it's where I was raised. And if they continue to ask that question, implying that they're unsatisfied with the answer that they're receiving, they're not asking the right question. And I think it's important to clarify the question, because then I can give them an answer. And also because then I think it highlights what they're asking. And, depending on the context and depending on our relationship, I think it helps them maybe get some perspective on whether or not maybe it's appropriate for them to be asking that question, or why it's relevant for them to know the answer to that question and what they're hoping to do with that information. Is it so that they can put me into a certain box because they think, oh, I thought he was from here and I was right, and therefore I've confirmed my bias, or is it for another reason? And so I think responding to that question with clarifying questions has been helpful in my experience.
Thanks, Ezra. I can very much relate to your feeling of sometimes being misidentified as a multiracial woman myself. And I'll give everybody else the floor if they would like to take it for the next few moments. Okay, let's move on to our next question then. An attendee asks, how do y'all feel about the new Asian American Center on campus?
Love to have the softball questions thrown in there. I'm thrilled about it. I'm personally thrilled about the Asian American Center on campus. So huge shout out to all the students and the faculty and the administrators and the alumni who made it happen. I think it's an incredible thing.
I mean, I would second that, especially being someone who was an undergrad here and didn't have that, and then came back for round 2 for medical school and kind of saw it happen last fall. I think it's such an amazing addition to our campus, and it really just does help to create the sense of community for everybody who does identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander. And I'm super excited to continue to kind of partner with the Asian American Center and kind of all of the other amazing groups, because it's a wonderful way to sort of meet people who are doing wonderful work at Carolina.
Alrighty. Does anybody else want the floor?
I was just gonna say I also agree, and really excited. I've actually gotten people who have also been interested in learning more about it, and so I hope I can help any way I can to continue to build it up and partner. And so yeah, very exciting.
Thanks, Kane. And more questions are popping in as I speak. Okay. How have you all dealt with burnout in navigating your identity and also being an athlete / student / professional?
I can sort of speak to that, given that definitely experienced burnout in Charlotte, and certainly at other times. I think a few thoughts. One, it's a ongoing process for me personally. So it's not like, oh, I've learned how to avoid it. It's more just learning how to navigate different competing priorities in a way that I learn when I need to take a step back more quickly so that I don't end up kind of in that burnout zone. And that's literally going to be my entire life, that I'm kind of continuously trying to get better at that. But one interesting thing that I found, which I think is directly related to being a student athlete, particularly those who might be current student athletes and at some point will retire from your sport, is going to Charlotte and just having my job was actually a terrible recipe for burnout for me, because as a student athlete, I had two things with almost equal priority in my mind, my sport and my academics. And so they sort of counterbalance each other. And in an odd way, while I was very busy, helped me, I think, avoid that sense of burnout, because I was putting my time and energy into two very different things. And one could kind of pull away from the other. When I got to my first job, I put all of my energy into one thing, which was becoming the very best data analyst that I could. And I didn't have a place to sort of recover from like the day-to-day work. And I just went home and kept working. And that was just not a good idea. In hindsight, I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but I think what I've learned from that personally, even in coming to medical school, is that I need to set up my life in a way where I have multiple things that I'm passionate about, so that I can put a ton of time and energy into one of those things, but also have something else that I can put a ton of time and energy in. And that for me is protective actually against burnout, which seems counterintuitive. But yeah, I don't know, has worked well for me.
Yeah, I'll join in on that. I mean, for me, I definitely experienced parts of that going into my senior year. And it's just when I think it's just very, very important to have, a well balance. And I'm sure that you've all heard this a million times, and it's just harder to do than, just saying it. So having something, you can't have your work or your school or your profession become your identity. And I think that's very easy for a student athlete to do, because that's something that we worked our entire lives towards, and something we want to do really well because we put in so much work. So I think for me, the key was just finding something outside of that I'm also passionate about, just to have a balance right throughout your training day, your training weeks, and your competition weeks. Because as soon as that becomes your identity, it's very, very difficult to enjoy it, because the hard week's going to be very hard, because your entire life is going to be very hard that week. So for me, just find the right balance, not having your identity be within your sport or your profession.
I also think it's really important of who you surround yourself with. It's really important to select friends who can bring you excitement about life and just give you the energy of trying new things, instead of having people around you that kind of suck away your energy and make life harder. So, yeah.
Thanks. And this question here harkens back a little bit to the sort of where are you from question. Like many of us, I've been told to quote unquote go back to where you came from. And how would you all respond to that?
I mean, it's a tough question, right? It's like, how would you respond to being called a slur? How would you respond to being harassed or bullied? And I think it's enormously context dependent, if it's a person or a situation in which you feel comfortable expressing hurt and letting that person know, like, hey, here are the ways in which that statement is one, inaccurate, right? Like nobody is nobody is from here unless you're an indigenous person, right? Like if it's a white person telling you that, their ancestry doesn't date back to the United States. But I think if what you're hoping to accomplish is awareness and education and empathy and de-escalation, oftentimes it's not helpful to engage with statements like that. I think often statements like that are not made in good faith because people want you to respond and say, yeah, okay, I'm going to pack up my bags and go back to Taiwan, or, it's just meant to provoke. And I think your options really are limited in those instances.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Ezra has said. If you have the opportunity to educate them and to speak with them, do it. But I think most of the time, at least the instances that I have encountered are big men with trucks driving by yelling at me. And I think it's just the most important thing is to make sure that you yourself is safe. So in that instance, the best option is to walk away. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what Nicole just said. I think every time that is a situation like that, I would think about, the response that I give, is it gonna be beneficial towards people, understanding us more, or is it just gonna be useless and cause more tension or play into his satisfaction of making that joke, right? So if it is, then just ignore him. Sometimes the best thing to do is just ignore. And but if you think that this person, there's a chance that you can have a conversation with them regarding it, right? It's not just a joke they're trying to make, then I say go ahead and engage. But I would say most of the time, a comment like that is meant to be, they're meant to draw up something. They're trying to make a joke about you. So in that instance, the best thing to do for me, I think, is just to walk away. I agree.
I think one thing that I will add is, I certainly agree with kind of the action in the moment, but what I would add to that is that can hurt, honestly, a lot, and as can a lot of little things. And so also take time and space to feel that and to share that with somebody you trust, and to work through that. Because I think for me, letting those things accumulate over time is not healthy. It's not good for me. And I found that having really good friends to go and kind of share those experiences with and to find kind of a sense of support is really helpful in those hard moments when you face that kind of discrimination and racism.
Thank you. And apologies to those who have submitted more questions, but we are nearing the end here. So I do want to wrap us up shortly. One more question is, do you have a favorite quote from your coach or trainer?
I can share one. I don't know if Derek Galvin, Coach Galvin, is still on. He was my coach and the head coach at Carolina for 39 years. I think it was probably my sophomore year, after a really rough practice and things were not going well. And one of the conversations we had is he literally said, don't try to eat the whole watermelon, which at first I was like, I have no idea what you mean, Derek. But what he was meaning is, if you try to swallow the entire watermelon, rind and all, it's not going to work. You have to cut it into small pieces and you have to take it step by step. And I think at that point I was recovering from, a pretty serious injury. I had torn my Achilles tendon the previous year. And I think that really stuck with me, even as I've thought about, things that I've navigated long since being a student athlete. There's that idea of when things get really hard, forcing myself to take a step back and kind of realize that as a whole, it might be, in an insurmountable challenge, but that if I can kind of break it into parts and also find the right tools, right? You need a knife to cut through the watermelon, etc. That it all of a sudden becomes a lot more manageable.
So actually, I'll share two quotes, and one of them is from Coach Williams. Before every practice, he would have a practice plan that he would give all of us, and it would really be a minute by minute rundown of everything we would be going over that day. But also at the top, he would have a thought of the day, an offensive emphasis of the day, and a defensive emphasis of the day. And before practice, he would basically pop quiz everybody to like regurgitate what those were. And one of the thought of the days that really stuck with me is the quote, one of the biggest tragedies of men are of those who gave up right before they reached success. And I think, I mean, for my life, it's always been about, again, having that belief in yourself, that you can achieve at a high level and really break barriers or any roadblocks that come. And then the other one is from Coach Davis. And he was huge on effort, just giving daily effort. And something he always said was, you know, what matters more in this exact moment than giving all of your focused energy and effort. And that's back to, you know, really being aware of where you are and what you're trying to achieve. So those two have really stuck with me, and I try to apply those every day. So.
Thanks, Kane. And I see we're getting toward 8:30, but I do want to squeeze in one last question. This is for Pinwen specifically. What are some support systems that you've utilized as an international student and would recommend to others?
To be very honest, I think I go to my coaches the most because they are the closest. They're kind of like my parents over here. I also rely a lot on my teammates because they are also very close to me and are like sisters and are the people I interact with every day. So I think the resources that are that you can most rely on is the people around you and close to you. I think if you can help them understand the situations you're in and educate them on your cultures or your struggles and help them understand how to support you, I think that's the best resources you can have.
Alrighty, thank you, Pinwen. And before we wrap up, I do want to briefly call attention to some of the other things that the AAC has going on for APAM. Appreciate all of you for sticking around. So, all right, so on April 30th at 7:30 p.m., there is going to be the APAM premiere celebration, and it will be live streamed on YouTube. And ongoing are submissions to the AAC Family Cookbook, where you can submit a recipe to be included on the AAC website. And if you visit aac.unc.edu, you can learn more about both of these events. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude Reclaiming the Commentary. I want to thank all of our sponsors again: Acura, Alumni Hall, Ben & Jerry's, Carolina Dining Services, and Lime Basil. Thank you to everybody at the AAC, Carolina Athletics, and SLL who made this collaboration possible. Our speakers, we really loved hearing from you and appreciate you taking the time. And of course, thanks to everybody in the audience who joined us for this special evening. And I'll tell everybody good night. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, removed everybody.